Good evening, everyone. Been a fairly busy day. I haven't been home most of it, so that's the reasoning for our bit of a late start tonight. We got Chapter 8, which is titled Stolen Thoughts, in the Order of the Trident 1. Next week, we got VisionCon, so that's going to be fun. We'll be releasing Book 2 officially. Then a week after that, I'll be at Queen City Studios in downtown Springfield for a grand opening and book signing. There will be several fantastic authors there. I think there will be some live music, a few artists. Overall, it's a big gathering of local talent, and it should be an awesome time. And then at the end of March, there will be Lebanon MegaCon, which I'll be there as well. So a lot of stuff going on, and hopefully it'll all be very good. Fun. Let's get into this, and then I'm going to get some other stuff done tonight and get ready for tomorrow. Chapter 8, Stolen Thoughts. The seasons came and went, passing like years in the evening sun. That makes no sense. Okay. The seasons came and went, passing years like the evening sun in the dead of night. The giant trees stood minus their leaves scattered among the falling ground, while the occasional crunch could be heard against the collection of fallen refuse. A young man skirted across the dirt-covered road, disappearing into the dense forest. The dark green and brown of his leather stood in stark contrast to the autumn surroundings, making his movement seem like a mirage, darting in and out of view. He watched the overturned wagon in the distance, drawing closer with each step. Approaching without caution, experience told him the danger had long since passed. Demetric stepped up to the broken frame and looked over the abandoned cargo. It clearly wasn't bandits. They avoided this part of the woods, in large part due to him. Moreover, nothing seemed to be missing. He'd seen the same damage many times over. He quickly checked the bodies for survivors. Despite their fate, it seemed this group was fairly lucky. At least they died before the beast fully descended upon them. Covering their bodies with a thick canvas, he dug through the scattered cargo, checking for anything he couldn't live without. He laid the collection of salvaged arrows out before him, checking each one. Hey, Scott, thanks for tuning in. Penthouse letter. I don't know, I might have to do some research to figure out what I'd be getting myself into there. Though I did talk to a guy yesterday who, different topic. Guy has some stories from his time in the Army and was possibly wanting me to do a biography-ish type story. Logistics still to be discussed on that, but anyway, hopefully that'll be something good and worth getting into. But as far as Penthouse, I don't know if they'd publish anything I've got to write. But let's see. He laid the collection of salvaged arrows out before him, checking each one, ensuring they were straight enough to fly true. Quickly stuffing them into his quiver, he grabbed a few other items he found and went to work piling the crates and other broken wood atop the shattered wagon, leaving the canvas uncovered at the center. Positioning the last few pieces to dome around the bodies, he poured a wineskin full of lamp oil over the wood and let it soak in a few minutes. Believing the wood ready, he struck a piece of flint, letting the sparks dance to life. They skated across the surface of the wood, disappearing into the pile. A moment later, they began to smoke. He waited in anticipation, watching the small flame climb up through the oak. It slowly moved along the corners, growing before his eyes. Within a few moments, the wood was engulfed, claiming more with each gust of wind. Satisfied it would continue to burn, he turned and stepped back into the forest. Finding a thick tree with low-hanging branches, he climbed up and positioned himself to watch the pyre burn away the victims. He pulled his cloak around him, shutting out the cooling evening air. The fire would keep him warm for the night, though the smell of burning flesh might make it difficult to sleep. Getting comfortable, he closed his eyes and listened for any sign of approaching visitors. Demetrix opened his eyes at the first light of morning. He glanced down at the pile of smoldering ash. Little more than a mixture of flaky powder and melted iron remained of the wagon and its occupants. He threw his cloak open, knocking the collection of frost and ash from the black barrier. He quickly scanned the area, making sure no one was around. Secure in his solitude, he climbed down and approached the smothered pile. The heat was nearly gone, buried beneath layers of cremated mineral. It was probably safe to abandon, but there was no need to take any chances. He kicked a mound of dirt around the edges and quickly covered the site, ensuring it wouldn't reawaken and spread to the forest around him. He kicked his boots against the base of a tree, knocking the clinging ash and dirt free. Dusting the gray specks from his leather, he stepped off the road, no destination in mind. A familiar roar echoed through the forest, shaking the limbs free of their remaining leaves. The roar recalled him to his childhood. Drawing his bow, he strung it and knocked an arrow in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, Demetrix broke into a sprint, hoping to reach it before it disappeared as it had 100 times before. Such a beast would never expect to be hunted by him. That fact alone gave him a chance of success. First chance he found, he shimmied up a tree and took to the branches. He could move quicker without the underbrush tearing at his cloak. His armor was a different story. He designed it to resist the briars and thorns. Truth was, he preferred the treetops. While he had less cover, he was able to move quieter and faster, and the typical bandits he'd taken to stalking rarely looked up. He jumped from one tree to another, making no more sound than a squirrel. He could see a gap in the trees ahead. He didn't remember this part of the forest. River, grove, rocks? He questioned to himself, unsure what to expect when he reached the edge. He stepped into view, his instincts screaming at him to stop. He locked his leather boots, letting the barbed soles dig into the bark of the thick limb. Feeling his balance established, he backed against the trunk and watched. The feeling he recalled as a child welled up inside him, torn between fear and tenacity. He couldn't run away this time. He'd kill the dragon or it'd kill him. Either way, he was done running from it. The dragon extended its neck, rearing its horned head up into the treetops. Its massive wings expanded, stretching out over the entire clearing. With an earth-shattering roar, it flexed its many muscles, waving its head back and forth in the cool breeze. A powerful blast of green spray shot from its nostrils and into the sky. Demetrix watched the sound wave escape the beast's snout. He couldn't imagine what force it would do to his body if he were caught in it. Unable to look away, he stared intently at the creature, lost in its fearful beauty. It seemed much larger than he remembered, yet he was only able to see part of its head in the cavern's underdark. How he had escaped such a creature, he'd never know. He trailed down the black scales shimmering in the sunlight to the spiked horns running down its back and tail. They glistened like the bits of broken glass he'd found in some of the caravans. Bracing himself, he carefully moved closer, keeping his arrow at the ready. He studied the dragon in the distance, watching for any change. The dragon's elongated nostrils flared, sniffing at the air. A familiar scent came to him. He scanned the tree line, searching for its source. Has my prize returned? Demetrix froze, his bow drawn and ready to release. His fear intensified, spotting the ruined glossy opal. Did I do that? He'll certainly remember me now. Lost in his thoughts, he hadn't noticed the large yellow slits the creature's good eye had locked on him. This was a mistake. How can I kill it if a dagger to the eye didn't? A booming serpentine voice echoed through the trees, threatening to tear him from his perch. So you've returned to me, Dollar Eye. I knew you couldn't hide forever. Your kind can never hide. He swallowed his fear, letting the wind carry his voice. I've come to kill you. I'll haunt your dreams no longer. He heard the words leave his mouth, unable to stop himself. A deep bellowing laughter erupted, holding his belly with his front claws as a portly human would. The dragon shook his head and sat on his hind haunches, wrapping his thick tail around him like a perched cat. So you believe you're able to kill me. Many have tried. Abandoning his humor, his nose wrinkled with disgust at the notion. It took you 218 years to build up the courage to die, but you came here with a purpose, and I respect that. The dragon stood, rearing his head. With a powerful thrust, he unfolded his wings and flapped them toward the ranger. Several gusts of deadly wind washed over him. He lowered his head in an attempt to withstand the force. I have to get a shot off, he thought. He released the bowstring, watching the shaft spin into the gale. The arrow twisted, its tail fanning out, catching the crosswind. The arrow flew out of sight. The winds were too strong. He couldn't hold much longer. Feeling himself slide backwards, his barbed boots tearing against the bark, he slipped. Weightlessness took him briefly. He saw the ground rapidly approaching. Bracing himself, he rolled with the terrain, jumping back to his feet when his knees hit the dirt. With blinding speed, he drew and knocked another arrow. Taking aim, he accounted for the wind and adjusted. With luck, he could fire under the currents, letting the string fly. The arrow launched. Its fletching spun, cutting through the gust. In seconds, the arrow sank deep into the corner of the dragon's scaled mouth. He roared in more irritation than pain. Lowering his wings, he licked the slight trickle of blood. The tip of his forked tongue pressed against the shaft, dislodging it. You're going to have to do better than that if you hope to kill me. Demetrix knocked another arrow in, ready to fire. His feet left the ground, feeling a hard force slam into his legs. He hadn't noticed the massive tail whip around behind him. Landing hard on his back, his arrow released, flying high, disappearing into the clouds. He rolled, narrowly dodging the thick tail crashing down beside him. Thundering steps were upon him before he could move. The dragon approached, all four legs moving in sequence. Atop the young dollar eye, he raked his front claw over him, pinning him to the ground. He was completely covered, his head alone sticking between the huge taloned claws. Clawed talons. Shit. I hate whenever I read words backwards. Demetrix struggled against the grip, unable to move. He watched the dragon's head lean in close. The rancid stench flowed from its mouth, burning his lungs. He felt vomit work its way up, settling in his mouth. Unable to roll over to spit, he swallowed the acidic substance, bringing the sickness upon him again. Every bone in his body shook from the booming voice, so close to him. I was going to kill you. You deserve it for destroying my eye with that dark stone so long ago. But I've had a change of heart, and honestly, you amuse me. Besides, Dollar Eye don't have much meat on their bones, and my stomach's already full. It's time you paid your debt. The dragon secured the blackened dagger with the tips of his talons, rotted out for the boy to see. Careful not to cut too deeply, he drug its tip across the boy's left shoulder, splitting the flesh with ease. The crimson blood spilled from the wound. He pricked the tip of his scaled finger, letting the blade cut into him. A single drop of his darkened red blood formed. He rubbed it into the wound and released the boy. Demetrix felt a rush of energy flow through him. Lying on the forest floor, he closed his eyes, unsure what was happening. The smell of maple came to his nostrils. He shot up, sending a damp rag from his forehead. Easy, lad, no need to be alarmed. A frail old man sat across from the bed, weaving a sweater from gray yarn. Where am I? He cautiously looked around the cabin. It was cozy and small. An iron kettle steamed inches away from the fireplace, radiating the sweet scent throughout the hovel. Daylight peered through the single window, illuminating the entire room. Nearest town is Faradron, 3 days west, but I'd recommend you regain your strength before you make any trips. He worked the needles, refusing to look up. Got some oats ready if you're hungry. He locked eyes on the kettle, feeling his stomach rumble at the thought of food. Yes, thank you. How'd I get here? He twisted, setting his bare feet on the cold wooden floor. The old man laid the incomplete sweater down and grabbed 2 wooden bowls. Ladling a scoop into each one, he placed them on the table and poured a couple tankards of milk. I was on my way home from a trade run when you wandered out of the woods. You were staggering every which way and clearly suffering from dehydration. You collapsed when you reached the road. I couldn't rightly leave you there, not with bandits on the loose and all. So I loaded you up and brought you here. That was 3 days ago. Taking a seat, he slid the milk to the far side of the table, gesturing toward the empty chair. How old are you, boy? 16? 17? He pulled out a chair and joined him. Staring at the mixture of grain and spice, he looked up, feeling realization set in on him. I don't know. The last thing I remember was being lost in the forest. I don't even know how I got here. A deep fear overcame him. Don't worry, boy. We'll find your folks. Until then, you're welcome to stay here. It's been ages since I had company. Truth be told, I tend to get a little grouchy in the solitude. He chuckled, slurping the spoonful of soggy oats. You got a name? He sat in silence, trying to recall any memory that he could answer of that question. A cascade of tears started down his cheeks. He tried hiding the evidence of fear, but it wouldn't be staunched. I don't remember. Seeing the boy's obvious fear, he stood, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. It's okay, son. Nothing to be ashamed of. It's how you overcome it that defines you. Since you can't recall your name, we'll just have to give you one till yours returns. Any ideas? The young man gently shook his head. Well then, I've always been fond of Cain. You think that'll suit you for the time being? Sobbing his agreement, he took a bite of food, feeling the taste buds explode with sensation of flavor. Sweat poured off his brow in the noonday sun. He lifted the wooden handles and pushed the strange cart through the field. The blade at the base sliced through the loose dirt, leaving it churned up for seeding. First time he'd tried using the plow, he wasn't even able to make a single pass. Now he could do 2 complete fields before he had to rest. Cain, dinner's ready. He finished the row before pulling the blade from the dirt. Propping it upright, he grabbed his white tunic from the edge of the fence. Rinsing his hands and face in the water trough, he shook the excess off and pulled his tunic overhead. The plow's pulling left again. I think we need to sharpen the blade. You already sharpened it twice this week. Much more, and there won't be enough to get us past the harvest. He chuckled at the young man's initiative. It was refreshing to see someone who worked as hard as he without ever asking for anything in return. Forgive me, I hadn't thought about that. He gathered his bowl and took a seat, digging in before he fully sat down. Don't be absurd. There's no need to ask forgiveness. Without you, I'd still be breaking up the dirt with a shovel. I think 3 fields in one season's more than enough to cover for a new plow, should we need. A smile breached his lips with the old man's praise. He liked him. He was funny. He always knew how to lighten the mood. Hey, Mortimus. I've already told you I can't dress as a scarecrow and wait for the neighbors to pass by. They won't fall for it a third time. He smiled, taking his seat. On a more serious note, he asked, What's up? I was stacking hay in the loft earlier today. I moved one of the bells and found a doorway leading into a room between the walls. I didn't go in, but there looked to be a bunch of armor and weapons in there. He stared at the old man with curiosity. I thought this day might come. I guess I'll have to leave in the middle of the night now and find another rundown farm to call home for the next 20 years. He smiled slowly, betraying his ruse. I'm just kidding. Finish your dinner and I'll show you the remnants of a time long past. The next morning they made their way into a barn and climbed into the loft. Mortimer strained against the stiff wooden door. Pulling it free, he climbed down the ladder and disappeared inside the hidden room. A moment later, a soft glow radiated from the hole. Cain watched from the top. The old man came into sight holding a weathered lantern. Come on down. Nothing but spiders and history down here. Which one are you? He couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't often he was able to make a joke about his friend. Very funny. Just because I'm fuzzy doesn't mean I'm a spider. And as far as history, let's say, they'll make things like they used to. The boy climbed down the ladder, lost in the sight of the treasures within. The wall was covered with weapons of various design and uses. Many of them he couldn't begin to guess what they were called. The suit of armor stood in the corner, positioned upon a stand. The once polished steel was coated with thick layers of dust from time and neglect. It stood over the room like a watchful protector, ready to strike at the first sign of trouble. The shelf beside it was full of glass vials of several colored liquids and scrolls, cataloged by different colored wax seals. He spotted a wooden plaque mounted to the wall. Inspecting it closer, he noticed the tarnished gold etched into the carved words. In honor of commendable service to the crown, Sir Mortimus, Paladin of Corn, is recognized as protector of the realm and granted deed to 1,000 acres of uninhabited land within the kingdom of Caldrum, King Renar Caldrum XIII. It was a long time ago. I grew tired of fighting other men's battles. When my wife and children were murdered as a way to get back at my king, I retired, letting my reputation die in absence. I haven't looked upon this armor in 30 years. Noticing a large sword standing beside the plaque, Cain approached and ran his finger down the etching of the blade. He couldn't read the letters, but somehow he knew what it said. Cain? Mortimus turned around, looking at the young man, lost in the runes upon the blade. He gave a gentle smile. It seems she's tired of being cooped up in this room. Pick her up. He looked from the sword to the man, wondering how he was going to lift such a heavy weapon. It appeared to weigh more than he did. Finding reassurance on his friend's face, he grabbed the handguard and pulled the sword from its stand. To his surprise, it weighed little more than a broom. How can something so large weigh so little? Well, if you're interested, I could teach you a thing or two. He smiled, unable to hide his excitement. Extending the sword, he tried to hand it to the old man. She's no longer bound to me. Only the true owner can read the words inscribed on the blade. She belongs in service to an honorable man. I lost that privilege when I locked her up in this room. The town was much larger than he expected. People rushed in all directions, attending the duties of their various lives. He didn't pay any attention, or they didn't pay any attention, and he didn't feel comfortable approaching them. He studied their faces. I wonder if any of them were my family before I met Mortimus. How would I recognize them, even if they were? I guess it doesn't matter. Mortimus searched for years with no success. We visited every town for a week in each direction. If I have a family, they either don't care about me, or they're further away than we can go. Shaking the thoughts from his head, he passed by one of the larger buildings, listening to the commotion within. He looked up at the wooden signpost above the door, the Inn of the Drunken Monkey. He smiled. I've never been in a pub, but all the best stories seem to start in them. Quickly tying the mule to a hitching post, he made sure the supplies were covered and secured before stepping through the magical door. The stench of pipe smoke burned his nose, but it was nothing he couldn't tolerate. Several people occupied the large room. Most sat around tables, sharing their joy with their companions. Others took seat at the bar, resting their rear ends against the rickety stools. A handful of attractive women rushed around the room, serving drinks and collecting coin. He carefully made his way to one of the empty tables and took a seat. The patrons didn't seem to care about the mass of people within earshot. They spoke freely, letting their opinions and ramblings of politicians fill the room. A select few clung to the topic of current events. It seemed some unknown assassin was at large, bringing his suspected death count to just under 60. His listening was interrupted by one of the pretty women approaching him. "What can I get for you, doll?" She gave a slight bow, exposing her overfilled bosom to the young man. I'll try an ale." He blushed, unsure how he should respond to her action. "Coming right up, sweetie." She spun around and disappeared through the crowd. He tried to find the man talking about the murders, but he seemed to have left during his distraction. He waited for her to return with his drink. Handing her a couple copper pieces, he tipped the wooden mug back, taking a long draw. The sour concoction burned his tongue and threatened to dislodge his lunch. Spitting the disgusting liquid on the floor, he jumped up and rushed out the door, hoping to wash away the taste with his water skin. Cain bust through the door. The bright sunlight burned spots into his vision. He hadn't realized how dark the pub actually was until he left. Approaching the cart, he felt his anger rise with the sight. The spotted fur he'd used to cover the supplies was lying roughly on the ground, and the cart was near empty. Only the most mundane of items remained. Picking up the hide tarp, he wadded it up and threw it in the cart. I was in there for no more than 20 minutes. I hate this place. His head hung low. He untied the mule and started for home. Mortimus is going to be so disappointed in me. Night was falling on the last leg of the three-day trip. It seemed to take forever. Not only was he growing hungry from lack of food, but the knowing failure he had to offer was eating at him. It also didn't help that his mind was playing tricks on him. That's the third time I've passed this fence post. That's impossible. I know my way home. Mortimus made sure I did before he would have let me come otherwise. I guess this just proves I wasn't ready for it. Screw this. He peeled the mule to the side of the road and tied it to a post. Unpacking his tattered sleeping bag, he rolled it out along the small wagon and got comfortable. The next morning, he untied the mule and set for the final stretch, haunted by his thoughts. Not even sleep seemed to help get his mind off it. Every time he closed his eyes, images crept into his head. It seemed even his dreams had to torment him. He recalled the few details he could remember. Was tracking someone through the woods. I found him held up in some little shack. The supplies were lying around, some of them already used. I hit him and tied him up. When he awoke, I cut off his fingers and toes. He begged me to stop, but I didn't. I laughed at him. Even when he begged me to kill him, I refused. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't finished with him. I don't want to remember this part. Bringing himself back to the present, he caught a whiff of smoke in the air, forcing him to remember the final details. I woke him up, his bloody form, minus his arms and legs, tied off to keep from bleeding out. He screamed when I smashed the lamp and lit his house on fire. He felt fear and remorse billowing inside him. How could I do such things? Sure, I want justice, but I'd never torture and murder a man for stealing from me. Even without Mortimus's tutelage, that's wrong. He couldn't get the smell of smoke out of his mind. He froze, realizing it wasn't the smell from his dreams. The smell was very real. Searching the sky, he found a thick cloud of gray billowing up from one of the hills. His heart sank. That's home. Abandoning the cart, he broke into a sprint. Reaching the top of the hill, he looked down at the flames ravaging the home. The house was nearly gone, collapsed in on itself. The flame was quickly spreading. It already burnt half of one field and was starting to spread to another. He ran as fast as his feet would carry him. Got as close as the heat would allow. "Mortimus, are you here?" A low grumble caught his attention amidst the roar of the fire. He ran to the barn, finding his friend beaten and bloodied. He laid on his back, buried in the grass. "Mortimus, what happened?" He felt the tears swell in his eyes. Pulling his friend close, he noticed the blood-stained shirt. He had several deep cuts across his stomach and chest. The realization hit him. It wouldn't be long before his friend would leave him forever. Mortimus reached up, weakly running his fingers over the boy's face. His lower jaw quivered. With a trembling finger, he pointed to the barn, sighed deeply, and fell limp. And that is the end of that chapter. I apologize, that was a bit rough to read tonight. I was sick, not this past week, but the week before, and still have the coughing and whatnot that's associated with it, so hopefully pretty soon that will all be over with. I already discussed VisionCon is next weekend. It's going to be awesome. I'm headed down Thursday evening. Hope to hang out with everyone and have some fun time before the actual event starts, but the event itself ought to be pretty amazing as well. And then again, Queen City Studios will be the following weekend, and then next month will be Lebanon, so lots of stuff on the horizon, lots more books to write, and I'll keep bringing you what I can bring you. But you guys have a good night. Bye.